Welcome to Talking to Famous People. I'm your host, Zach. We have host Strauss, Eric. What are we talking about?
We were talking about this video where it's Carolyn, what's her last name? Okay. Carolyn Zajkowski. She's a woman who sits in front of books, and she talks about extroverted intuition in this video and ENTPs. And I told Zach I really thought this was one of the best videos I'd seen about it, and was very impressed with her and liked her a lot and thought she was an INFJ.
Do you think that she accurately depicted ENTPs and ENFPs in her video?
I do, and I'm particularly struck by the way that she describes it, extroverted intuition dominated people as inside-out self-actualization. This notion of having the actualizing process, which is normally internalized for most people, be done out in and through the world.
So the actualization process and what in discovering truth, or
Well, this notion of actualization is an interesting one, and I have mixed feelings about it. But I understand that there is some sort of need to establish a set time object to refer to a state of being wiser than one is now, or being self-aware. There's a lot of different words we use for it, right? Self-development, actualization, type actualization,
I would say,
awareness.
as Jung would put it, making the unconscious conscious, right?
Is that what he says is the way to go?
Yeah.
Is to take your unconscious functions and become aware of them?
Yeah, I think what he ultimately means is, not to speak for. What I think it means is that by he alludes to the fact that if you don't recognize your things that would be identified as your shadow, or the functions, the cognitive faculties that are inferior in you, that are oppressed, that they will control you and you will be mostly unaware of it, and that you will attribute those shortcomings based on those repressed faculties as just fate or just the nature of things, right? And so
Okay.
the goal is to understand yourself better by understanding your repressed faculties and the repressed aspects of yourself, and that is the process of self-actualization.
Okay, but I'm more aware of my SI problems. It doesn't seem to have solved them. Well, I mean, it's cleaner now than it used to be, but it's always been like this. I had periods of cleanness and periods of sloppiness. Maybe, maybe it'll prove that from now on it'll be clean, but the data doesn't suggest that.
Well, I think it goes deeper than just the faculties, but like in the context of the cognitive faculties that's the repressed faculties would fit that paradigm, right? So, for example, like my lowest function as an ITP is FI, and I I experience FI. It manifests in me, but it manifests as an external impression, right? It's mostly unconscious, or almost entirely, and it's very. I have emotional reactions. I can be in emotionally down states of being, and not really understand why, right? So like a goal of I would say a goal of an INTP, for example, would to be to progress the self by understanding FI, understanding yourself, and by doing that, you understand your unconscious faculties. Now, the ways in which someone does that, Jung would probably argue a various number of ways. Psychotherapy is probably something he would argue. Um, Dream interpretation, that's when you start getting into the more subjective stuff, right? But, yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's one model that says the eighth function and the first function have the most presence in your life. The eighth function has the most presence in your life in ways that you don't attend to. SE. So if I were to accept that model, I would say it has the most functions in my life because, on the one hand, I am extroverted intuiting, but on the other hand, I'm taking a fair amount of action and not really thinking about that process at all. Well, how and when do I take action and why? And what does that mean even? And I just sort of do sometimes and don't. It doesn't seem to exist in any kind of intellectual framing at all, which is odd because most things in life aren't like that, obviously. Why is Delilah calling me? Let me find out what's going on. Any thoughts on that?
Uh, regarding SE and ENTPs, I mean, I don't know. I don't really know how SE manifests for myself. Um, I don't really engage in much SE stuff, right?
Right, but the corollary is the thing. For me, the way that I perceive that model as happening is, yes, SE is big in my life, but it happens without my attention.
Mm-hmm.
And the corollary would be for you, yes, FI is big in your life, but it happens at your attention. That how you feel is much more active in some equivalency to what I just described. Do you think that equivalency exists, or do you think that that's not true? Can you turn off that light, please? Delilah, I am making a video, and the lighting gets bad when those lights go on.
I guess the.
I guess you can't put it in the video.
I can't put it in the video?
What I'm going to talk to you about, yeah.
I missed out the recording.
Okay, I'll mute the mic here. Okay.
Okay. So I guess I'll just kind of ramble about FI. I think FI and INTPs definitely manifest as unconscious, and I think it has a strong influence. I guess you could say that all the faculties have influence over the types, but I think FI definitely has a strong influence on INTPs in particular. I think that I'm very susceptible to my FI, but I'm not. The problem is I'm not aware of it. The problem isn't that I'm susceptible to my FI. The problem is that I'm not aware of the ways. I'm not readily equipped to deal with the ramifications of it, and it creates a lot of mental distress because of that.
What do you think those ramifications would look like?
Sort of. Not paying attention to your own emotional needs, not paying attention to how your relationships with others is affecting yourself. I think that INTPs fall into I want to say the loop, but INTPs view the world as logically categorizable, and things that fall out of logical categorization, such as arbitrary feelings, although they're not, there are reasons to feelings, but the INTP has a hard time processing them because they don't see a rational application for them, but they do have real ramifications on, they manifest in real ways towards the INTP and can bring about negative influence if they're not dealt with. It's sort of you repress your emotions, you repress how you feel about your mental states, your emotional states, until they manifest abruptly, such as like panic attacks or in anger and stuff like that.
Zachary, can you include please Grail's chat box in the picture?
That works. Yeah, it should be in the picture now.
I think for INTP manifests and what topics INTP feels are important to examine. What do you think about that, Zach?
I could see that. I think I think FI. I think FI also is concerned with what I'm talking about in regards to the ramifications of not dealing with your FI or not understanding it for INTPs is that there are for at least speaking for my own experience, I find myself in emotional states without any. I don't understand the essence of the states, right? So I don't understand what led me to certain emotional states that I know I'm experiencing them. I don't know how to solve them, and it can bring about negative influence over my life. I think you might be right about FI manifesting externally as a topic that in INTP is important to examine. I think you're right with that. I think it would manifest externally in the sense that they would be on board with if they have certain values. Like I definitely think INTPs can develop values towards certain areas, and in that regard, the FI would manifest as almost like a stubbornness when one of those values is traded upon.
So I'm telling this person, Grail here, uh, to watch about 3 or 4 minutes like you did of their. Do you remember approximately what time the good part starts?
It was something like 2 minutes in or something like that.
Yeah, okay. Uh, so anyway, we were talking about that video uh, and about what self-actualization is and what it means. And the reason we're talking about it is because she is indicating that the ENTP actualizes inside out, that is to say, out in the external world. And and so in the process of discussing that, uh, Zach would explain was explaining about how NE manifests differently for an INTP. Obviously, for an INTP, you're using it's in the service of TI, right? So when TI is going to have this NE suggestion thoroughly vetted before it actually goes into action, right?
Right. It's
Okay.
Go on.
And it makes it to me, even though I find that the INTP and NTP can be remarkably similar, and yet that change in that vetting process uh, it makes us manifest actualization in the exact opposite domain, so to speak.
How do you mean?
Well, I mean, if this lady's right and I'm actualizing externally in the outside world, do you feel like for you as an INTP that for you to actualize, for you to really get yourself down, it's going to rely on every speck of that process being made into a video?
No.
I mean, because that's basically what I feel like.
Oh. Well, I guess that's the difference. No, I think. I guess that.
That's
Well.
what I mean. The actualization spot is opposite in a certain way.
Okay, I
Right?
see. Okay, I
So
see.
you're doing yours internally, and my actualization is this moment right here. This is me actualizing. I'm in the process of doing it, right? I
That's
think
so
this
foreign to
lady was
me.
saying, but what this lady was saying was that, the real actualization happens when I go back and reflect and process and stuff like that. That might be true for you. I don't know if that's a type of intuition thing or if it's an introversion extroversion thing.
I would say that's true for me. I think that I need time to introspect and categorize the information that I'm processing. Digest information. Digest is what I would consider it.
I think I probably do a certain amount of that when I'm sleeping, for sure. I tend to wake up with sometimes with some insights that I didn't have when I was
I
asleep.
find that no matter how much reading I do or how much conversations I have with people about certain subjects, I never really gain any deeper understanding about them unless I take time to reflect on what was considered.
What was considered?
Yeah.
Let's see. Well,
And you
I
say
mean,
that
it's possible.
you don't
Yeah,
have
I
to.
think you look at it in a couple of different ways. Whenever in a reflective state, meaning, do I reflect on how I'm doing in a larger sense? It could say that I'm always in that state or that I'm never in that state. I don't know. If I'm walking around, I'm reflecting on something,
Well, say
I guess.
when I'm okay when I'm anytime I'm engaging with anything, any type of information, and that includes like interacting with others or engaging in any type of medium, that is when I'm engaging my NE. And the only time when I can really, I feel like I talked before in one of the videos about the TI-SI loop and how it can be dangerous for the INTPs because they get locked up in that and they don't want to use their NE. But I still feel it's important to tap into that loop to be able to categorize the information that you are processing. But at least for me, I don't gain any deeper understanding about things unless I reflect on them. I don't know why that is. Like, I have to.
Well, I've noted in myself before a different, what I believe to be a different, and I suspect it's common with any Dom, a different way of organizing things in, mentally, which is that instead of really having any organizational structure, there's like the ghosts of my NE paths, so that if I land on somewhere and I'm trying to think of something, it'll walk me back along the same parsing process, and I'll come to the same conclusion. So he says I have these faint tags of, oh, well, that's that idea-ish thing. And that's sort of over there, and that's good enough. If I can get there, then I'll naturally see, oh, well, from here one would naturally go, or I would have gone this way. Oh, yeah, this way. And the more times I walk down that path, the more compressed that whole set of concepts is into a single idea, a named path. Like, oh, that's the Hokie Trail, where you see all these various sites along the way. The more compressed something gets, the more efficient I become in I guess you'd say, having something that's like memory.
That's interesting. How would you view your own memory? Would you consider yourself having good memory?
No,
Yeah, that's what I thought. SIM.
I see myself as, and yet I'm able to draw upon a massive well of facts.
Mm-hmm. What do you think that is?
Well, I think it's because of the thing I just described. The way my memories are categorized is, instead of spending energy printing them deeply as understood things, I don't print anything as an understood thing.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Everything's up in the air, so you're constantly interacting with it and refining it.
I print little, like, hubs, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And then around there are little pathways between them. And as I get, there might be a new hub. Some of these pathways, once walked a couple of times, it becomes obvious to me that if I hit that hub, oh, that's one of the pathways. I could walk down there in time to figure out what it is again. Or I naturally will, anyway, unless I try to find a new path. I think it's organized like that, and they're just these ghostly little things. And like, as I walk past a bunch of times, it becomes more of a tag. It contains all this information that I can actually access meaningfully. So I think that's how my memory is everything's it's organized for utility, not for permanence.
I see.
That's what I think. But I don't know. It's hard to think about yourself like that.
It is hard to think about yourself like that. Well, I feel like the INTP is better equipped to understand themselves through that lens than the ENTP, because they're naturally more inclined to. Whereas, like you said, the actualization for the ENTP manifests externally, whereas the INTP can rely on their introspection for actualization.
So, okay, let's talk a little bit more about this word called actualization, though. What is the goal, really? What are you trying to accomplish, and how does one know if one has accomplished it, and what do you get for it? How much do they pay me for that?
What's the goal of self-actualization?
Yeah.
Well, I guess from my understanding, the goal would be to develop a cohesive foundational identity for oneself. And in doing that is when you become aware of, you try to become as aware of all the ways in which you can be influenced by phenomena within yourself as possible.
So, awareness of phenomena within oneself is a good thing. Do you think it has anything to do with enabling free will, that you become less of a deterministic creature if you understand more the ways in which you're inclined to function?
Perhaps. Yeah, we know Grill. I don't know how we got on the eighth function. I forget. We're talking about self-actualization, we're talking about self-actualization and that, and becoming more aware of your repressed faculties. Then, yeah. But what was the original question, Eric? Oh yeah, is being aware of with free will. Well, the free will determinist argument is really interesting. I would see it as, the way I view it is that, ultimately I don't know, but if I had to guess, I would say that you don't really have control over specific actions in a moment, but you can change the foundations by which you generally operate through an act such as introspection and considering phenomena that goes on within yourself. And by manipulating that, you can adjust behavior for the future. Does that make sense? So you don't have a conscious will over what phenomena appears within you, but you have a conscious will over what you do with that.
Okay, but what about this notion that it's possible to have a deterministic function which is fundamentally deterministic, that is, say, it's responding, this meta function, let's call it, is responding to...
Well, what would be the function?
Well, let's give it a name called Floyd right now. It's just a hypothetical function that exists. Okay, I'm going to tell you what it does in a second.
Okay.
Hypothetically. This hypothetical function, it is deterministic in nature, which is to say, it is predetermined what it does. But what it does is require the individual to have free will.
Yeah, so the essence is you don't have will over the essence of it, but you have the will over the utility of it, right?
Yeah, I guess that's true. Yeah, you don't have will over the essence of it, you have will over the utility. But what essence mean?
I guess essence would be, there's a certain train of thought I'm thinking of. It'd be kind of like
The thing we're referring to?
with
or
essence.
our intended meaning?
Well, I view essence as, so if I like introspect for a second and think of or become aware of my subjective phenomena. All right, if I think of like, if I want to think of three movies, right? Okay, or just that, the question of thinking of three movies. Okay, that popped into my head just now, right? I don't know where that came from necessarily. I can observe the ways in which we got there, but I don't know ultimately the essence of its existence. I just know that the subjective impressions that it is put upon my awareness of that being. And so what I do with that and how I interpret that would be my will, whereas the essence would be determined that it appeared.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So, like,
Is essence the same thing as the distinguishing of distinction? So in other words, like this is this is something that has boundaries. It's this and not something else, and it's not that, it's not that, it's not that, it's that. This is how it's bounded out. So for example, talk about the sentence. This sentence right here, that sentence right there that I was talking about, this sentence right here, is an object with discrete boundaries. I've distinguished it from other objects. It's one unit, it's one thing. It might also be part of a larger thing like a video. It's a component part of it, right? But that one sentence is itself a distinct object because I've distinguished it as an object and because the nature of grammar makes expression into objects that are sentence length. But
so what would
I
the
guess
what would you be arguing the essence is? The essence would be the meaning of the sentence, or would the essence be the impressions which it
I'm saying
refers to?
the essence is contained entirely within that distinctioning process.
Okay,
That
that's what
it's
you're saying.
in the boundaries. It's in the boundaries, so to speak. And then what it's not.
Mm,
Because the definition of something is always really exclusionary. It's not inclusionary if we're using it in a deductive fashion. So if I say this is a duck, I might define it as what it is, but fundamentally, we know what a duck is because we can distinguish that which is not a duck.
well, you can distinguish external impressions, but that would be based on your receptibility to the impressions. But the essence of it would be you wouldn't be able to observe the true essence of it. You would be able to observe the ways in which that essence manifests.
Okay, so would you say the essence then is the thing that's left when you take away the word?
Which word?
Depends what we're talking about.
So if they,
The duck. The thing left. The thing that's left when you take away the word duck.
uh, no, because it's still the concept of a duck is we can view the ways in which the essence of the idea of duck manifests in the world, right? So even if you remove the idea of remove the word duck and you just visualize a duck in your head, all right, you can identify traits of the duck. You can identify ways in which you can perceive it as an object within the world, but further than that, the being of it, the ontology of it would be the essence.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
I think I get what you're saying. Here's my perspective runs afoul of that notion, and here's how. And I can. Oh, I guess that's still okay. It runs afoul because if you think about it in the following way, if you're saying something about a duck, you're saying it for a reason. So you don't just go randomly up to a coffee counter at this shop and just blurt out, "Ducks float on water. Can I have a large coffee, please?" Yeah, if you did do that, you'd be doing that for some reason, to like get a reaction or something, right? So the real issue is not so much the comparison of the words to an observable reality. The actual thing that matters is the comparison of the words to the intended meaning of the word in the context in which the person is saying it. So if I say duck and a ball's flying at your head, I don't mean, hey, look, there's a thing floating on the water over there. I mean, duck, you know. And if I am talking about a duck in general specific,
Yeah, but you
duck,
have to be
I'm talking about
exposed to
that
those
specific duck.
external impressions to even be aware of the concept of duck.
Well, I agree that we share uh, a space object frame of reference, and we have to. And the reason is because the nature of space objects is that they don't change unless we put energy into it. And so for space objects to be space objects, we have to share a reality of them.
It would
Because
just be the shared impressions of that thing, right? So like if something is like if this pen is black, it's black insofar as like we both have the receptive faculties to interact with the matter, and we both identify as black.
I'm telling you, here's what you can expect if you were to go to the shared space reference land. You could expect to find a thing that floats on water that looks white and has the thing that you think of as being a duck. We share this term to reference something that we're both seeing in very similar ways. We never actually are talking about exactly the same thing. And if we use the word to mean that duck, we're talking about that actual duck. Like, go grab that duck. That's a different meaning than we're talking about ducks right now. We have a picture in our head of what a duck is. That's the thing you're saying is the essence of duck. But what I'm saying is there is no essence of duck exactly. It's a word that we're using to tell each other, here's a prediction. You can expect X when you go to this lake. And we have a whole bunch of words now to say what I see here over in my reality is probably, if I use these words, then what he sees in his reality is going to correlate with what I see, and he's not going to be like, why I'm standing in the middle of the North Pole. There's polar bears all around me, and you're talking about ducks. What the fuck? Those aren't ducks. Those are polar bears. It's not going to be like that. It's going to be like, okay, yeah, we agree that's a duck, because that's what words are. That's how it comes into being.
Well, I think
Let's
that
see what
linguistics
Daryl
would
said.
exist in a well, linguistics would be a way to categorize the impressions from the essence, right?
But what's the essence, though? Why do we need an essence? What does it do?
Well, the way I view it is that there's an essence to objects or things in themselves because there has to be some implicit nature to the existence of objects.
Well, I think their nature is as we as it fits in our reality. For each of us, its nature is going to be different. But let's read what Grail says here out loud. Human nature is to identify and name things, therefore bringing it to our consciousness, yet limiting it to that word. So I wonder if perhaps free will is the same in the sense that it's the best we could come up with in our limited understanding of the concept. Yeah, possibly. I like the first part of that. I'd have to think more about the second part. The first part of that I'm ready to think about. Um, it is our nature to identify and name things if we are. I think it's our nature to need to experience reality in static objects. We can't experience it in its actual true fluid form.
Right. And so the fluid form would be the essence in what I was saying.
But it's not a thing then. It's not distinct. In its true fluid form, there is no distinction.
But then you're just but if you say that, then you're just defining things by their external impressions, and there's no way to justify the existence of other minds.
Well, sure there is.
Well,
There's
no,
plenty
because
of
then you're
reasons
judging then you're judging someone. If you judge things that exist within the external space, the nature, you're judging it by the external impressions unless you assume there's an essence to it.
The fact that I get confused is proof that there are other agents.
Elaborate.
How could I come up with something I don't understand? How could I come up with a whole system of ideas that I don't understand calculus? I know it exists, but I don't understand it. I could go learn it. How could I have a whole system already in my head that exists, that's complete, but not understand it? Unless there are other agents.
The other agents would be required to put down the law that system beforehand. Is that what you're saying?
Well, put it this way. I'm getting data coming in from somewhere. And
Right.
if it's all within me, then where's it coming in from?
The external realm.
I am experiencing new data. I'm not cycling through the same pile of data over and over and over again.
Well, then you know there's external information flowing in.
Right. Now, I've deduced from that external information there are other agents like me because some of those data streams look exactly like another agent going through the same reality creating and information processing experience.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is
And
there's no way to identify if other people, for example, are sentient, and what we identify as sentient would be self-awareness or consciousness. There's no way to identify that unless you assume there's an essence to things, right?
okay, but I'm saying those same things, and I'm asking those same questions. So if in fact that is indicative of self-awareness in myself, then there's no reason to presume it wouldn't be indicative of self-awareness in you. And in fact, it would be exactly the same as if it were self-awareness in you.
Well, sure
If
it
it
would.
looks exactly the same, it does all exactly the same things, then it is that thing.
Yeah, but you know you have your own self-awareness because you possess your own metacognition, but I don't have that metacognition of other people's cognition, right?
That's true, but the fact that you can't, the fact that the data coming in can't be verified against some um, against some standard outside of your own experience of reality is because reality itself is a emergent function of consciousness. So there can't be a reality that you aren't observing because without the observation, it wouldn't exist. That reality. Now, that's what we have to each render our own concurrently. It can't be that even though there is a realm of physical objects that we share and that appears unchanging and probably is unchanging. It's exactly the same thing with you being an agent. Why should I assume that this laptop or this desk or whatever is real and not just a figment of my imagination? Well, I've got ample ways of verifying it's real if I have any meaningful definition of what real is. And if I don't have a meaningful definition of what real is, then the problem is I've chosen not to provide an adequately static definition of real to do meaningful work with words.
What's your definition of real? Your static definition of real?
Well, I would say real is it's going to somewhat depend on the context in which you use the word, but basically, if it's real, then it has meaningful impact in your life is the minimum threshold. Some meaningful impact in your life makes something real to you. However, if you want a more precise definition of real, we can verify things that are additionally real to others, beyond just to me, um, through multiple verification methods, which includes, hey, do you see that thing right there? You see that elf standing there, or am I hallucinating? That's one verification method. You can. There's lots of different ways.
Yeah, but you see, that's exactly what I'm saying though. Like the ways in which we verify what's real, you can only do that insofar as the external impressions. And when you judge things based on external impressions, the way in which they manifest in reality, then there's no way to.
But your impressions are never external. Your impressions are always internal. The external stuff is what we assume to be there because the data coming in is not old data; it's new data.
Well, okay, look, okay, for example, this pen, right? The essence of this pen exists. Follow the argument, okay? So let's presume there's the essence of this pen and exists. Well, the ways in which it manifests in reality, that it's black, that it looks like this, that it's, in three-dimensional space, that would be the external impressions it has on the reality. And how we interpret those external impressions would be the subjective impressions.
Who's having the impressions? Who's impressing?
The object would be impressing onto the reality, and then.
So the object's doing something? Hold on, let's get Grail in here. He or she says, essence allows common human experience for me, allows the building of societies. I think that has to do with perception, though. Subjective perception and with consensus, assume one fits the best perception and agree on it. How are you defining the word essence? Okay, well, that's the thing. I don't think that word has any meaning.
Well, I'm struggling to define it.
It's doing something. It's not, though.
Well, my argument is basically I don't know the exact definition of essence, but I'm presupposing that things have an essence and they exist in and of itself. Because if you don't, then there's no way to justify something such as the consciousness of other sentient beings. That's my argument, and my reasoning is that that the only way we can verify something that's real is based on our impressions, our receptibility toward information from the external environment, and objects present that external information to the environment.
One second, sorry.
Okay. No, essence would equal reality essence would cause impressions upon the reality, and what we identify as reality would be the impressions that manifest from the essence of things.
Okay. Well, here's what I think about that stuff that you're saying is that we could we could go with the following. Reality, like
Well,
everything else in the universe,
well, can I respond to?
presupposes two observers. So we could make the argument that something is real when two people observe it.
With the response to Grail, so reality is subjective because it requires subjective perception of the essence of the object. No, I think that reality is defined. Uh, Reality exists based on, like, what I would identify as reality would be the information that's impressed upon this realm based upon the agents existing within the realm, and your subjective perception and receptibility to that information would be your interpretation of the reality.
Read the next paragraph, though.
But then there is still the object that is unaltered, which we put our subjective to.
Okay, here's the thing, guys. The object's not unaltered. The object's always altered by our observation. It can't be anything but altered by our observation. And one way we know is this thing called the Zini paradox, which they've established that by observing something, you can force an atom to stay in place in two places at once or something like that. It's one of those quantum test things they do. Anyway, the point of it is observation is clearly a force. It's a force of some sort. It's not just, we think of it as being the opposite of that. We think of it as not doing anything. We think of it as just watching. But it's actually some sort of a force. It functions on the atomic level, and it obviously functions in every other sense as well. There's no reason to think that this force that we're talking about of observation is in fact the force of reality rendering. Now, just because we both share a similar, very similar experience, we can describe experiences that make us think we share a similar experience of a given rock, and that it appears to stay the same and be measurable equally by each of us, right? So we can go up to it and say, I weighed it, it weighs a pound. And then you come later, I weighed it, it weighed a pound. Time's passed, it stayed the same weight. Different people, it stayed the same way. We're describing it correctly in some way if we both agree on all this stuff, right? Because it must have an essence of rock that weighs 1 pound. Well, no. What it means is that the nature of space is such that it has to be rendered the same by everybody, because that's the definition of space. It's that thing that gets rendered the same by everybody.
And space would be defined by the observational forces that are being imposed on it.
Well, I would say, yeah, it's being that it attains its solidity to the extent that it has any by virtue of being the part of reality that we render each as solid, so that is built in hardware-wise to be space. Because space, see, we don't render our time objects the same way at all, because time objects are subject to different rules. So it's like in your head, you don't have the same sense that the way that you visualize a picture of a tree in your head, that your visual notion of the essence of a tree is the same as mine. You don't believe that to be the case. We both agree that our trees probably look different, but yet we both agree that they're both trees. And how exactly is it that we make these distinctions? Well, the reason is because we define what something is by what it is not by what it actually is. And so, and the way we do this is we say, if you're using the word tree, there's a certain range of things you could be referring to. If you're referring to something that falls into the not allowed stuff, which is everything else, then we conclude that there's some sort of miscommunication. If you are actually referring to a weed growing in the yard that's like a dandelion, and you say, oh, there's a tree growing out there, you gotta pull that shit out. I go outside and it's like, that's not a tree, that's a dandelion. The problem is that it's one of intention. Like, we both agree that when we are concurrently rendering something in the space object world, that we use static symbols for that because those things are pretty much static. and we both agree what we generally consider to be a tree. But it's not that there's an essence of a tree. It's that it's the same thing as with. Mm,
Wait,
no,
what's
I know where
the
to go.
okay? What go back to the observation is a force. What is that based on again?
All right. Well, let's Google it. It's observation causes.
Here, I can't. I
We'll,
can't.
we'll
I don't want
pull,
to like
pull it
impose
out of.
on the.
I'll do it. I'll do it. I'll
Yeah,
do it.
yeah.
Let me Google it so I give you something a little bit more concrete here.
Mm.
Observation holds atomic particles. All right. So this thing here. Once an observer begins to watch the particles going through the openings,
Oh
this
wait,
is
yeah. That. Wait, keep reading. Keep reading. That sounds familiar.
okay. So I will. And here we go. Let's load and load and load. Science Daily Magazine. Scientists have now conducted a highly controlled experiment demonstrating how a beam of electrons is affected by the act of being observed. The experiment revealed that the greater the amount of watching, the greater the observer's influence on what actually takes place. The research team, headed by blah 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 blah. When a quantum observer is watching in quantum mechanics states, the particles can behave as waves. This can be true for electrons at the submicron level at distances measuring less than 1 micron. They can simultaneously pass through several openings in a barrier and meet again on the other side of the barrier. This meeting is known as interference. Strange as it sounds, interference can only occur when no one is watching. Once an observer begins to watch the particles going through the openings, the picture changes dramatically. If a particle can be seen going through one opening, then it's clear it didn't go through another. In other words, when under observation, electrons are being forced to behave like particles and not like waves. Thus, the mere act of observation affects the experimental findings. The crucial thing here is this what I keep saying about needing to experience reality in static chunks. So it's true on the quantum level as well. That's what observation is. It's the rendering of a fluid, not a fluid reality that does not have distinction, waves, into um, a concrete reality that it's made up of static chunks, particles, and that's what language is for us. It's our ability to make particles that represent these waves. They don't just represent them, but they become the currency of the wave, so that we understand the waveform entirely through this pattern of words that we're spitting out. And it's because these tiny particles have these are waves that our observation has collapsed into a particle. And now here it is. Here's a particle for you. Oh. And now that we have YouTube, it could be a particle that has the magic of time magic to make it such that this sliver of our collective agencies combined produces this unique time object, which then we put out onto YouTube, such that those particles that have been collapsed from these waves have become accessible by anybody and have ever-increasing linkability and parsability as well, because there's lots of ideas in here.
Can you link that article in the chat? By the way, I actually do really want to read about that.
Sure.
But this is this video's gone on for a while, so I think we should wrap it up. But we've gotten to some really good stuff with metaphysics, I think, in this video.
I agree. I feel like we're making progress here. I like making progress. I feel like I'm understanding better than I used to understand and stuff like that. This quantum shit fits well. You know, it's like it makes sense. I better answer the phone for Abraham. That's a good time to end the video.
Thanks for watching Talking with Famous People.